I very much appreciate that, and as you said, I agree with most of what you said. But I do think that the average person can be educated. I completely agree that the Constitution was, and its founders were, as we all know, are drastically flawed. That this was a Constitution giving rights to wealthy white males. This was a Constitution that came out of another unnecessary war, propagandized itself by those more privileged in this country, our revolution. And thankfully, the Constitution has been improved in some very helpful ways through the years, but we barely touched it. This is a thing that's deeply flawed. It's 2¼ centuries old. They expected us to amend it significantly. They expected us to hold new conventions to give it overhauls. And we're 11 original out of the 12 original amendments, and then I think 17 more. 2 of those are to criminalize alcohol and uncriminalize it. Most of them are to tweak how you elect presidents. We barely touched the thing. So I'm not recommending it as perfect. And I do think that, Freud didn't get everything wrong, and people want daddies, and Bush stuck his chest out and looked like an idiot for a reason. But much as we can always improve how we speak, and we can always be more pithy, and we can always have stronger messaging, and we can always do more polling, I think it verges on self-flagellation when we put all the blame on ourselves for not being articulate enough when they own the damn television networks, and we don't. And so when the agenda that's supported by these mega international corporations that own our communication system is advanced, it isn't always purely because people on the right were wittier. Deeply kept secret. They aren't. These when you elect people like George Bush and Dan Quayle and God forbid Sarah Palin and Glenn Beck, this is a fondness not for intelligence and wit. It's for something else. Yes?
I was wondering, okay, well, I have a couple things. First of all, you seem to, you're assuming that, or you're arguing that there's this sort of progressive majority that just for some reason hasn't done anything, or is it that there's like the Tea Party movement has really come to the fore, and I know that they're highly publicized, but I mean, are you suggesting that there's just as much stuff going on the left, but we just don't see it because of the media? So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, what about socialism? I'm starting to think that maybe that's a term that needs to be reclaimed and used by the right, because by the left, because we're so running scared every time someone says, "Oh, that's socialism." It's like, "Oh no, it's not socialism." People don't even know what it is, right? So is that maybe a framing that can help galvanize and give some structure to what's going on the left?
Well, I would argue, as I do with a lot of documentation in the book that's here, that on a lot of issues, majority opinions in polls and surveys, and quick telephone surveys and lengthy projects of investigation, the American public is much further to the left than you would ever imagine. But in those cases, usually that majority thinks it's a minority. Nobody knows they're in the minority because their televisions tell them their views are crazy all the time, even if they're majority views. But to say that there's a majority on any issue in terms of what people will tell a pollster on the telephone is completely different from saying they'll get off their butts and do anything to advance it. And it's always a very small minority of any country, of any society that advances any agenda by being active and pushy about it. And that's a very different question. There is, of course, lots more activism than we see on television when it's not in the interest of the television. I mean, the Tea Party movement was created by a television network, so there's an obvious interest there in covering it, if not promoting it. You can have 500,000 people march around the Capitol and say, "End this war," and get a couple little newspaper articles, or you can have 20,000 people show up and socialism sucks or something, and have it be a big saturation news coverage event. So, not what you see is not always what's there. But even if you saw everything, there's not nearly enough there. On the other point, obviously there's the argument that, well, if people think the word socialism is bad, then just talk about the policies you like and avoid that word. And then there's the contrary argument, well, if that's the word that best describes the concept we need people to understand, we can't be afraid. We have to use it and advance that debate. That's what they do. I think both of those are very reasonable positions. But I think either way, to point out to people that they like having police departments and fire departments and schools and highways and so forth, and that these things are not evil and satanic just because they're done through the government, I think is worthwhile. And I think it's worthwhile to point out endlessly and hammer home endlessly the fundamental hypocrisy of these clowns who are out in Sterling in a hardware store this morning announcing a new contract on America, that they want a smaller government. No, they want a smaller government in every area except the largest piece of the government, which is the military. There they do not want a smaller government. They want a larger one. And so it's not a question of the size of the government. It's a question of what's the government for? Will it do anything for us? Or will it just hurt other people abroad? And there we have the difference of opinion. And it gets framed as a difference between small government and socialism. But it isn't. It's a difference between militarism and funding human needs. And, whatever words you use, I wouldn't be afraid of a word if you think it helps make your point. Yes? Everybody, people outside of this row right here can ask questions too.
I got here a little late. I drove from Maryland to get here. Did you mention...
Thank you for coming.
It's a confusing campus, I tell you. Did you talk about the Democracy Project and what that's about and what people, or how people could get involved already? If
I
you
did
have,
not. Would you like to?
I would like. Have you done that already?
I have not.
Could you do that?
No, I don't have any qualifications to do
Oh, you
that.
don't? Oh, I thought you were sponsored by them.
Wait.
Can I just say something?
Okay.
Hi, I'm Claire Snyder-Hall. I'm the Democracy Project Campus Coordinator.
Okay.
And we sponsor events on campus. And the point of the Democracy Project is it's a national initiative to stimulate civic engagement among undergraduates.
Okay.
And it's sponsored by the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, and also works with the New York Times. And it's nonpartisan, or multi-partisan, I guess I should say. And we mostly sponsor on-campus events such as this one. However, we are also doing curricular issues. Some faculty and I are doing some curricular development. And we don't actually have a very good way of getting students involved, strangely, since that's our mission. But there hasn't been... I feel like we're just starting to get a hook on things this semester in terms of mobilizing, because I have a student who's actually organizing a student sort of unit for Democracy Project that's encouraging. So that's what that is.
Okay.
Anyway.
Wait, can I
So it's less than expected, but
Okay.
we do a lot of co-curricular programs. The point is to try to stimulate discussion and ideas, and to get students to take a lead role in forming their own organizations for things that they care about.
Okay.
But it has to come from the students.
I'll talk to you after.
Yes.
Is there anything you're involved in? Like that kind of, like what you're saying is completely, like I'm totally about all that. So is there something that you're involved in, that you crystallize these ideas, that crystallizes these ideas?
Well,
Or is it just you?
I work for and with a lot of activist organizations and coalitions on different issues. I blog at davidswanson.org and on a website called warisacrime.org, which is a coalition and links to lots of useful groups and places, warisacrime.org. I'm on the board of Progressive Democrats of America, whose local chapter here is doing this event at 5 o'clock today in the conference room. I can't say the guy's name, but there's a conference room, and Dave Keebert will tell you its name. And I work with another group with that D word, Democrats.com, which is a website. There's a broader coalition in the peace movement called United for Peace and Justice, and their website is United for Peace. question of fixing the Constitution so that money isn't speech and corporations aren't people. I would send you to two places I've worked with. One is freespeechforpeople.org, and the other one is movetoamend.org. But there are, depending on what particular topic you want to work on, there are endless great resources, sites for information and for activism. So you can contact me with specific questions.
Thank you.
Yes, in the back, and then up here, and then we'll go over there.
All the items you listed that you feel are going wrong with this country, if you could pick one item and have it by this time next year solved, if you get the ball rolling to solving the other problems, what item do you think that would be, and something that we as citizens could actually get out there and work on and not be rolled over by the powers that be?
Well, it's very, in terms of structural reforms to our broken system, it's very hard for me to choose between the media and the money. If we could, for example, pass that bill to create public financing, we would still then have to create a movement to get people to use it, and there'd still be lots of other money in there, but that would be an incredibly huge reform that could be done in a week if there was the will to do it. If we could, better yet, amend the Constitution to get the money out of the system, that would be a stronger reform on that problem. And if candidates had to win votes without the wealthier candidate having a huge advantage, that would be a wonderful improvement. There are two ways to amend the Constitution, and one starts in Congress, which is where the problem is to begin with. The other one it circumvents Congress by starting in the states and finishing in the states, and that means organizing to push state legislatures to start it. So, and then to have a constitutional convention. If we had a decent communication system, then all the other problems could get fixed down the road. Because we would be able to talk to each other and learn accurate information. And information of use. In a democracy, media outlets would tell you what's coming up. You wouldn't just get the Washington Post story about god-awful thing they just passed yesterday. You would get ahead of time what they're considering doing and how you can get involved on one side or the other. So, we would have a very different communication system if we had community-funded media and public media and, in England, where they don't have the same free speech, they have publicly funded media that pushes privately funded media to be better than ours because it doesn't have that push. And many countries fund public media, and it's not tied to endless debate over what it's doing. It's given liberty, and we aren't going to survive without either of those, without both of those reforms. But short of structural reforms, if we could end some of the wars and close some of the bases and shrink the military, start the process of shrinking it, it's still growing, that would be hugely important. I think there was, yes.
I thought your point on military spending was very effective, and obviously in terms, thank you, Ronald Reagan, for that, but it brings me, in my mind, a comparison of the war on drugs. In essence, we kind of created that war with the term war on drugs. It's just before that term was used, drug cartels were not picking up weapons and did not consider themselves soldiers to fight. And it brings me to the term war on terror. In essence, we created that term, we created that war. We made these terrorist organizations legitimate. They're now, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So, in essence, we created the issue of us spending more on our military, as we did back in the 80s with Reagan. It's happened today. So, how do we get the American public to move past that stereotype to allow them to agree that we need to decrease our military funding?
Well, that's an easy one because we're already done. The majority of Americans do want to decrease military spending. but how do we get some fraction of them energized to really push for it and organized and a campaign heavily funded to make it happen? I don't know. I mean, there is a group of congressmen in Congress now pushing it. It's not like we have to start from zero. Congressman Barney Frank, who, if he burps, he's on national television talking about banks. He held a press conference. He's done it, twice in the past 2 years. Maybe it's the third time with a detailed plan to cut 25% of the military. Not one reporter there. So we're up against, who owns NBC? General Electric. Where do they get a lot of their money? Making weapons. All of these companies with their interlocking board members, they're like a cartel. They're like the enemy in the drug war. And they don't have an interest in helping us here. So we have to figure out the communications problem as we figure out this problem. We didn't create the war on terror. I mean, if you can't have a war on a tactic or an adjective, I mean, it's insanity. We didn't create that unless we were members of the White House Iraq Group, or we worked for Fox News, or CBS, or NBC. But we're stuck in it now, and people think it's there. And as long as the casualties aren't too high, this trickle of 6 dead Americans every day doesn't seem to faze anybody at all, and that's very frightening. We have to somehow push this agenda forward. And with people not wanting to oppose wars if they're not in the news enough, or the president's a Democrat, or whatever, I think it's very, very encouraging that the peace movement is getting an assist now from civil rights groups and labor unions at least joining together to say exactly this. Let's take the money from where we're wasting it, or where we're using it in a counterproductive way that makes us less safe, and let's invest it where we need it. And so, be at the march on October 2nd in Washington with as many posters as you can hand out that say exactly what you want said. And everybody's going to agree with you. If they don't have a poster, they'll take yours. And join up with those groups that are involved and push this coalition that's forming around, where we don't want the money and where we need it. We'll be able to get the message through to Congress that we want the actual wars defunded, war on terror or not. We could go on forever, but let's go.
As you probably know, Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert hold a political rally. I understand that they're both comedians, but do you think that perhaps comedy could be a solution to the problems that currently face our country? As in terms of, not creating a new political philosophy, but just kind of getting through all the annoying bullshit, and ultimately, as Jon Stewart wants to bring sanity to the situation.
Well, I think we have a horrible, horrible healthcare system, and comedy is good for people's health, so that's a contribution. I think that when Jon Stewart tries to play middle of the road by showing, the people who think that, Obama's a Muslim, atheist, socialist born in Kenya who wants to set up, a communist system and so forth, because global warming is not real and all that. And then he shows clips of friends of mine with Bush's a war criminal posters and goes, now, these two sides are crazy, and we're going to go down the middle and be serious Americans and comedians. I think that's reprehensible. I think that, a lot of times he's funny, and a lot of times he criticizes people who damn well deserve it, and nobody else will criticize them. But to push criticism and mockery of everybody across the board, right and wrong, and to just build, cynicism is not that helpful. Having a big rally right before an election and telling people to vote no matter which way they vote, if they do tell people to vote, can't hurt. Nobody votes in this country. That's a problem. But, it's not advancing an agenda with any particular goal. And to bring in Tony Blair last week and have him say, we went into Iraq with complete UN authorization, and Jon Stewart just sit there. His interviews are not the least bit funny. My dog could have interviewed John Yoo better, or Tony Blair better than Jon Stewart did. I mean, his goal seems to be to make sure that nobody else hesitates to come on and be interviewed. And, and then he says, oh, well, don't blame me, I'm a comedian. So those words aren't the funny ones. So, I'm glad people get their news from there since they don't get it anywhere else. And I'm glad, it makes fun of people who deserve it. But, it's not really the principled, independent movement for peace and justice and social responsibility and civil rights that's needed. I don't want to mock people because they're activists. I want to mock people because they're activists for racism and hatred, and he just seems to be against all activists. So, but I never agree with anybody, so that's the closest I ever come to agree with anybody.
I was just wondering what actual amendments for the Constitution that you're thinking of. Like, you talked a lot about how it should be amended and changed, but
well, there are a lot. There are a lot in my book. If we run out of time in the next 2 minutes and get thrown out of here, but I think the Constitution doesn't have a lot of positive rights in it. It's all negative rights. They can't do this. They can't do that.
The Bill of Rights does that. The Bill of Rights has a lot of positive freedom.
Well, it has freedom of the press, but we don't, really have it, and so forth. Structurally, I think that our government has weaknesses. We've at least allowed the Constitution to be interpreted so that 9 people in robes with lifetime appointments can tell us what the Constitution should be. I think that the Senate was a very bad idea and should be thrown out. There's absolutely nothing accomplished by adding the Senate to what the House does. It's never added anything to our democracy. Get rid of the Senate. Use all those nice, luxurious offices to expand the House so that people don't have to represent 700,000 people. Can't be done. The House hasn't been enlarged in a long time. There was an amendment in 1938 that almost passed, and Franklin Roosevelt killed it, that would have said, before we go to war, the public gets to vote on it. We have a public referendum, should we have war or not? That almost passed in Congress, which is the beginning of the process to amend the Constitution in 1938. I don't think that would have been a bad idea. The Constitution says Congress gets to decide on wars, but then they put in place this War Powers Act that has exceptions to that, and yet is not strong enough in what it does. It has no penalties attached to it, and so forth. There's endless ways that the Constitution should be strengthened, and I think we're going to have to be very careful to spell out the obvious. Nobody who wrote that thing could have imagined that they had to put in there that corporations weren't people. It just didn't occur to them. There was no debate over it. They decided not to put that in there. So we have to amend it very, very clearly to deal with the misinterpretations that are in place and those that we can imagine.